My name is Dennis Stallings. I'm in private practice here in Raleigh with Clark Nexon. I also teach at the College of Design and have taught there for quite a while. So I am pleased to be here tonight and to see you all. Adam Ruffin is tonight's speaker. He is an architect and partner at ARCHITECTUREFIRM with offices in Brooklyn, New York and Richmond, Virginia. He grew up in Atlanta and attended the Georgia Institute of Technology. He received his Master of Architecture in 2002 from the University of Virginia, where he currently serves on the Dean's Advisory Board. After graduation, he picked up and moved to New York and worked for Tom Pfeiffer and Partners for 15 years, where he became an associate director there. If you all know of their work, it's quite good. So he had the great opportunity to work on a wide range of really great projects there and develop some of the more important ones, including the North Carolina Museum of Art here in Raleigh. Not that I'm at all prejudiced. Many of the projects that he worked on while he was there went on to win AI National Honor and Merit Awards and garner international recognition and attention. 2017 and joined ARCHITECTUREFIRM, where he now is the associate or the manager for their Brooklyn office. While he practices in Brooklyn, he wanted to be sure that I let you all know that he grew up in Atlanta. He feels like he's a product of the South, as are his partners. His partners in the firm, they all met at University of Virginia. They're very proud of being from the South and of Southern heritage. They enjoy practicing here. He feels a particularly strong connection to Raleigh, having worked on the Museum of Art project here, and is really glad to be back. And I didn't realize that Matt was going to know this. I was going to spring the surprise on him, but Adam and I actually crossed paths in Tom's office many, many years ago, probably 15 or more years ago now, at the beginning of the Museum of Art projects. I was with another firm. We were two different firms working on the same project together. So Matt, thanks again for letting me introduce tonight's speaker and for allowing us to reconnect tonight. So with that, please welcome Adam Ruffin.
Hey gang, there's a lot of y'all. There were a lot less of you when I went back there. It's not me. I think I have a place to put this. Okay. Greetings. Okay, I'm Adam Ruffin, partner at ARCHITECTUREFIRM. Matt, thank you so much for inviting us and our practice. We happen to know Matt and a bunch of other people, basically everyone else in his office, from a variety of different circumstances being here over the years. We've got a couple people I'm going to introduce to you who are wolf packers as well. But thanks to Dennis also for that introduction. It is amazing that I was able to work on the NCMA project. It's one of the most transformative projects that I've ever worked on. Doing a project like that with Tom Pfeiffer in a place that's close to where both of us grew up was really incredible. So I'm really happy to be here, and I thank y'all for coming. This is my team. Danny and Katie McNelly and I are partners in the firm. We all met at the University of Virginia. Danny's from Richmond, Katie's from Texas. What's up? Really? It seems super loud. Okay. Is that better? Okay, cool. Sorry. This whole thing is like blasting back at me. So Matt Pinion and Jason Dufio are wolf packers here. So wanted to make sure they got recognized as such. So our team is 16 people spread over the Richmond office and the Brooklyn office. There's a bridge over the James and a bridge over the East River in Dumbo, where I live. My partners and I really got our start on the Solar Decathlon project back in 2002, and this was a project that was run by the Department of Energy. Bunch of universities and colleges competing with each other to try to make a home that would run on solar power, that would be able to compete in 10 different categories over a week of time, and we had to design it, We had to build it. We had to get it to the National Mall in DC. And so ours is called the Trojan Goat. And the idea was a goat can live anywhere, eat anything, and via the Trojan Goat aspect, we were going to convince everyone that solar power was amazing, that sustainability was the way, and this is in 2002, and that, you know, sustainable materiality, different ways of thinking about building. We really used the building as a lab for a whole host of crazy technologies that no one had ever done in a house before. And it really kind of set our foundation for the way we think about architecture and building. Can we be responsible about it? Can we make simple forms that don't require a lot of extra dynamics? Can we use our resources properly? And can we connect buildings to their place? I also know a lot of this crew from having been included recently in a South 40 exhibition, which was kind of group of like-minded folks all over the Southeast. It was Virginia and North Carolina and Tennessee and Atlanta, Georgia, and a bunch of different places. Architects who really care about working in these states and in this region and in producing contemporary architecture that is still rooted in the Southeast. And so, as Dennis mentioned, I grew up in Atlanta. It means a lot to me to be able to do really progressive, serious architecture in the Southeast, which is not necessarily the most attractive environment for it. Brooklyn, it's a dime a dozen. Everybody does the same thing, and it's easy. It's really hard to do this kind of work down here, as most of you know. So we were really excited to be included in that. And also, as Dennis mentioned, this building is really important to his office, to my office, to Thomas Pfeiffer and Partners. And so I was able to be involved in this from basically the beginning all the way through construction. An amazing project to not only kind of reinvent a collection, but put it into spaces that were completely different from any space these art pieces had ever been in before. Full spectrum daylight, the dynamics of weather and sun. It's a really amazing project that I was lucky to be involved in, but brings me back to North Carolina a lot. That's not me. It's close. So a friend of mine, Scott Singheisen, teaches at SCAD, and he posted this thing the other day, and this was his post, and it was about Ernest Hemingway having this moment, like serious writer's block, and he was in Paris, and he was looking out over the roofs of Paris, and he was trying to figure out a way to get out of this writer's block. And the paragraph that Scott quoted here, basically summarized with "write the truest sentence you know." And I said, Scott, that's awesome. Now do it for architecture. And I didn't actually expect him to do anything, but he did, and he went and rewrote the same paragraph from the perspective of a designer or an architect. And he said, design the truest experience you know. And I'll read a little bit. The key component here is if I started to design elaborately or like someone introducing or presenting something, I found that I could cut the scroll work or ornament out and throw it away and start with the first true, simple, declarative experience I had designed. And that's amazing. And Scott was just doing his thing, posting things because he's smart. This really resonated with me personally because I think this has a lot to do with the way we work at ARCHITECTUREFIRM. There is a component of what we all know in experiencing space that we can repeat and that we can latch onto, and a lot of the work that we try to do is really focused on trying to create an experience but get out of the way of what's natural about a place. And even if that's an apartment in New York City or a house in the woods, we're trying to do work that is simple and elegant and true and not disruptive of a place, and we really kind of take this spirit into most of the work we do. I'm going to run you through a quick little batch of projects, and then we'll get a little deeper into some other things in a smidge. But this was actually the first project we ever did just outside of Winston-Salem, and it was a house for a family friend, little clearing in the woods on a steep hill down to a lake. But we tried to be kind of dynamic within this little moment. Simple form. The form was carved out in multiple ways to kind of reveal the woods to the user. This is a project we did in Montauk with Nelson Bird Woltz Landscape Architects. And we were trying, you can see the shingle style houses in the back. This is obviously in addition to a kind of small estate. And we were trying to distill the language of the shingle style in a contemporary form with this pavilion and this small residence on the left side, and then this garden and set of pavilions in the center. So we used a much simpler format, obviously, with no roof lines and no real complications. Took that same shingle style, the shingle, 4-inch exposure on a real 18-inch cedar shingle, and combined that with the stone and the land to do something very simple but still super evocative of that place. I also worked on the Corning Museum of Glass with Tom, and after that project, we had a good relationship set up. So we did a study for their Make Your Own Glass museum space there. This room actually has 9 different glass-making procedures going on, and so people come in here and learn and see how to make these things. We did another piece of work with the William King Museum out in Abingdon, Virginia, for a collection of primarily animal and nature paintings and sculptures, presenting this work in a soft top-lit environment similar to what we had done at NCMA. This is a house we did in Gloucester, Virginia, trying to kind of take advantage of the white clapboard traditional architecture in this part of the world, putting it right on the water, but with a very simple form. This is a house we're doing in Front Royal, Virginia. On the woods, it's on the South Fork of the Shenandoah River, trying to really capture the essence of the front porch and a small cabin that's clad on the outside in wood and clad on the inside. This is a home in Bird Park, right in the middle of Richmond, on the street packed with 1920s and 1930s Italianate mansions. And we thought to ourselves, okay, in this spot, the wood box just doesn't really do the trick. How can we connect to these other architectures down the street and really figure out the form and the fenestration and, distill that to an essence? This is a project we are working on in Churchville, Virginia. About 180 acres of agricultural land, and this is a retreat for a company, and they wanted to be able to bring up to 80 people to this project and house them, let them work in groups, but also learn about their environment and the setting. And it was all anchored around this existing barn structure that we were going to renovate and turn into a restaurant space, a dining space, an event space, and gathering for this company. This is another project we're working on that's a renovation of this beautiful 1860s mansion in the Hudson Valley, where we're turning this into a 40-room hotel, using the main building as entry spaces, cafe, restaurant, bar, kind of salon, a few suites, and then adding to that in a language that is refined but using a similar material palette. We have our own Lucky Strike Tower in Richmond, where we did this project for the Arts and Letters Creative Company. This is an old power plant for the Lucky Strike. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Richmond, but they have a whole tobacco row, very similar. It's on the river, all these beautiful old buildings. And so we kind of carved out everything that was inside this very flexible open work environment for this office. They're basically a creative branding and marketing company. But they needed a bunch of different ways to work. And so we kind of carved out and then inserted these very careful pieces. They have about 180 people in this office. And so we kind of wanted to make sure that what we were doing was protecting the envelope and that anything we inserted in it was very clearly ours and not of the original building. So now I'll get into a few a little more in-depth projects. This is really the first project that we did as an office, the James River House in Scottsville, Virginia. And it is a small home. It's on a 40-acre plot. It's very wooded. We wanted to create an environment along the bend of the James River that would very quietly sit in this wooded environment and take advantage, based on where we put the building on the site, of the steep drop down to the floodplain and some slightly different conditions in the landscape. So we broke up the program into a kind of living zone in the middle, a primary suite and bunk room to the right. That connection is basically the front door, and then a guest suite to the left. So as you come to it, you kind of find these boxes in the woods, and you are kind of presented with a solid facade into the woods that create kind of a zone. And then as you move through them, you start to understand the expansion of the view, and then each volume has its own view into either the river from the main volume or into slightly different topographic and wooded views from the bedroom spaces. All clad in dark stained cypress. Just the faintest hint of these things kind of floating above the ground, and you see all the way through. This is actually a bridge connecting the two volumes, so that the landscape really does flow between the buildings. That's the mechanical coming on. So then you see this is the deck. The entire left wall of the living volume opens up so that the living space, the kitchen, the dining space, and this deck are fully connected. You have to have a monkey in every house. And so then we switch to this softer kind of cream white stain, same material on the inside. But you see that the way that the windows now kind of put the building right into the midsection of the trees. You're not below them, you're not really underneath, you're in the canopy. So it really has this almost like treehouse feel from the insides of the space. And families. This side is sort of the hearth, and everyone gets together around this outdoor fireplace, and then you move through and you get the experience of the view in the woods. This next project is kind of the project that created the office, the Quirk Hotel in Charlottesville, Virginia. This was really the project that was kind of big enough and juicy enough for us to really build a team and kind of expand a little bit. So in Richmond, Virginia was the original Quirk Hotel done by the owners of Quirk Gallery. And it was this amazing old department store, very rich brick details, this amazing kind of flattened arch main sales floor. And we were brought on to do, my partner Danny did this at his previous office with a group called 3 North. So we were brought on to do the second in Charlottesville, Virginia. And as I mentioned, we had all gone to UVA and spent a significant amount of time there. So we wanted to make a little bit of the traditional kind of central Virginia architecture of masonry, stone columns, these trim elements, and also connect to what was really strong about Charlottesville, which is this kind of Main Street corridor that runs right through the downtown mall, which you're seeing here, all the way to the university. So the downtown mall is represented on the right side, our little circle there in the middle on West Main Street, and the university and the academical village are over there on the left. So we were presented with a kind of a big, nice square site that had these two existing buildings on the front, on the kind of street face, historical homes that we had to preserve. And so we actually brought them into the program. The red brick building on the right became the cafe with a whiskey lounge above. The kind of grayish brick building on the left has a commercial space on the bottom floor and then 2 hotel suites above. And we were able to kind of put the mass, it's a 80-plus room hotel, so it's not a small building, but we were able to gather the mass of it toward the back of the site and then come out with this very small snout to address West Main Street and to bring in people at a more kind of pedestrian scale. It didn't have to be this larger building. And so we drew on this masonry tradition, but we wanted to elevate that and give this building a little bit of distinction. So we use this nice flat Roman brick in this cream color cast stone elements around all of the building entries. So the plan of the ground floor sort of shakes out like this. You see these two houses that I referenced just earlier. We wanted to make sure that there were significant connections through this site so that the residential neighborhood toward the north and this main street of West Main could really be connected, and that we weren't putting up a big block to this neighborhood that had coexisted with this otherwise empty site for quite a while. And you see along the right side, really the organizing element of the whole building, this public lounge zone. So you come off the street, well before you're checking in, there's kind of an open and public living room for people to come in. You're already seeing art on the wall when you get to space. But then you're able to move all the way through this. There's an open bar. It's not an open bar, but there's a nice, generous bar for people from the public to come to. And there's another suite of spaces. There's a retail space. There's a double-height contemporary art gallery in the rear. There's a fine dining restaurant here in the center that also feeds out into this courtyard space. So I mentioned the mass kind of collects itself toward the back of the building, embracing these front buildings, these historical houses, and creating this courtyard space in the middle. And so you're able to move between these buildings, and then you see the way this kind of moves into the courtyard. You've got the restaurant. There's also a rooftop restaurant and a kind of complete roof terrace that's open for events. There's also a bar up there and a wonderful restaurant. So the entire building is really activated by the various program elements. And then this section shows moving straight from the front door all the way through this open public lobby and back to that double height gallery space in the back. Use this language of these kind of flattened and segmented arches. It's like a hurricane outside right now. Of these flattened, segmented arches, and this was obviously a nod to the original Quirk in Richmond, but we love being able to sort of connect the brand architecturally and also use these arches. You can, the way they pair up in plan, every time there's two of them, you walk off axis, either to the fine dining restaurant or to the entry to the rooms or to the gallery space in the back. This is that kind of sunken pit that we also use for movie night and various kinds of gatherings. The retail's in the back, and you see through to the neighborhood in the rear. This is the entry to the elevator and the double height gallery space in the back, which is run as a legitimate gallery. They do rotating shows, every 6 to 8 weeks. We also did all of the interiors on this project, so this is one of the suites. The headboards for all of the beds were developed in collaboration with an artist called Kiki Slaughter, who lives in Atlanta, who's amazing. So basically, not only were we collaborating with the gallery on the art pieces in each room and in each space, but there is a dedicated, on canvas, amazing custom piece of artwork in every room. The roof terrace, Charlottesville is situated kind of in a bowl. The mountains are all around it, so this terrace space is able to take advantage of an almost 360-degree view. The courtyard and some of our flat bricks. So I'm going to talk about a few projects in Raleigh and Durham. This is an interiors project that we did in collaboration with, that we're doing in collaboration with Jay Davis, who's the building architect. 20-story building right over near the Red Hat amphitheater. We were brought on to do the interiors, so we're doing the main lobbies, the amenity spaces, the interior selections for all of the units. You see the location right over here. So this is the design of the exterior of the building. A really great, elegant building. There's so much sort of light stone building architecture in downtown Raleigh. This building really plugs into that. Here's today's version of the building, so it's coming right along about half height right now. So we wanted to ground the interior design in an idea of kind of earth and water and sky. Our entry, lobby, and mezzanine is really grounded in wood materials, stone materials. We have the main amenity is actually adjacent to the pool on the 6th floor. So we kind of bring in ideas about water in that design. And then on the 20th floor, it's probably the only space like this in a residential building in Raleigh, but we really wanted to kind of accentuate this, the sky atmosphere and the changing light in that zone. So this is the interior of the lobby. This mezzanine is meant for the residents of the building. You see the main check-in desk to the right. The mezzanine is meant to be kind of a calming, fairly structured piece of architecture within this double height space. And it houses the leasing offices, the mail rooms for the residents, and leads them through back to the residential lobby. This is that mezzanine space above, which is meant to be kind of a lounge and coffee space and co-working, bring in more of the stone and the wood details. Then up on the pool lounge on the 6th floor, almost moving into kind of a nautical architecture, bringing some of the details and the colors of the blue and the green into the detailing of this space. And then up in the sky lounge, really leaning into these soft surfaces, soft shapes, and these round kind of plan moves throughout the space, and trying to accentuate the kind of change in the color of the light and the sky through the day. And then over in Durham, I was lucky enough to give the, what do you call yourselves? You the cohort? The workshop? Okay, the cohort of the workshop, a tour on Saturday of a couple of these buildings. And so we have been engaged by a developer who is here in town to do 3 different multifamily buildings in the neighborhood kind of between Central Park and 5 Points. And so this is kind of, here's downtown Durham. We're just in this zone. And so we really wanted to start from what's here, which is this beautiful tradition of brick architecture and these factories and warehouses, and take advantage of a similar scale really to buildings just like this in the buildings that we're going to develop. These generous openings, this kind of massive brick wall type. And so in the first of these on Corporation Street, it is a large building because we have frontage on 3 sides. We had to adhere to making the corner a tower and dividing the building up every 50 feet. But we really wanted to extend this structure of these large windows, this very simple kind of fenestration pattern, and these sawtooth these end up being the 2nd floor of the appurtenance that goes up to the roof, but kind of reference these sawtooth skylights from industrial architecture. So this is a rendering of the building. You can see the way we're also using the kind of push and pull of the facade to create these terraces in a few of the window units. So, each one of these apartments is basically 2 of these units. So we're trying to create depth in the facade by also carving that out, but not make it a secondary piece of architecture. And there's your sawtooth reference on the rooftop. And this is what this looks like on Saturday of this week. They're doing a great job with the brick. These guys are trying to get probably 17 tons of granite slabs into the window under much duress. Then just a few doors down, called the Rigsby Apartments, this building goes block through The kind of cant of this facade is based on some setbacks and allowances for utilities to move through the site. Again, but in a totally different direction, referencing the red brick and the structure of these factory and warehouse buildings, with a base of stone and sort of gray concrete and tile, and then a gray panel at the recess floor above. This small volume here will be a restaurant space, but it also allowed us to create a pool terrace, but still be able to maximize as much of the property that we could for leasable space. This guy is a little bit beyond this picture at this point, the cohort nose. We're also doing the interiors on this project, so bringing in some of the warmth of that same palette into the resident lobby. And then up on the pool level here is the amenity lounge, trying to be, again, pull in some of the tones, but have a very generous and kind of bright space. And there's the pool. You'll all soon be dining there in that terrace and enjoying yourselves. So the last project I wanted to talk about at length, we'll call it Camp Adirondacks tonight. In the middle of New York State, the Adirondacks Park is a really massive place. And so we're lucky enough to be working on this project that's modeled after the kind of Great Camp, which is a building and project type kind of most popular in the late 1800s and early 1900s. But this area was really, people were drawn to it because of its natural beauty, the ability to hunt and fish. And so it's actually the seat of this particular kind of architecture that is really meant to get out and take advantage of these spaces. Our program here is a great hall, which will be the kind of main gathering space for the family and their guests on this project. Multiple residences, small cabins that people will stay in while they're here, a renovation of this boathouse, and just a bunch of ways to get out into the landscape. So we've been going here for over a year now. So we've seen it in snow, and we've seen it with the lake frozen over, and we've had to go on a snowmobile and drag Christina from our office behind it as we're making our way out into the lake. Our friend John set up a nice ice fishing tent for us so that we could get out there and really feel the cold. So we've been working with Reed Hildebrand on this project, and this is kind of a site plan. You see the broad kind of rectangle of this guy. It's a big site, and most of it, well, not most of it, 40% of it is water. And so as you're moving through it, it almost feels like the coast of Maine rather than the interior of New York State. But part of our initial goal and working with Reed Hildebrand was to study different ways for the owners to kind of get out into the space using the buildings that we knew we were going to build to really stretch out the property and create different places for them to go. The peninsula here, this little zone called Walshy's Point. You can hike through the entire property. It's an amazing place, but coming through multiple schemes to try to figure out what's the best way for us to use this place in the entirety. So we kind of landed on a scheme that pulls you off the main road. We'll create a kind of front gate, caretaker zone, a gear barn, and a place for you to park your cars, and then really start getting into the site. This will be the location of the Great Hall. The residences will gather around that. There'll be a pub or a lodge over in this space. Really trying to get out into the site is kind of the key. So what's amazing that we learned about the Adirondacks is the Adirondack style of architecture is totally unique to this part of the world. It's an American style of architecture. It's not the same as Switzerland, and it's not the same as Colorado, and it really is it kind of has its own set of elements to it. So we wanted to study that and really understand how to translate what we were doing through the lens of this Adirondack style. So we, broke this down into diagrams, really understanding what this architecture is about. You can see its porches, you can see its covered zones between buildings, boathouses, and pavilions out in the landscape. They also cover everything in bark, and everything is rough-hewn, and we're not really going to do that. But we were really interested in trying to distill this thing into a language that was contemporary. So in studying the various elements of all of these old great camps, there are moments where buildings connect. There are these bridges between spaces where you have a really intense landscape connection. And there are other elements of that architecture that we really wanted to draw from. So we started diagramming different ways to approach this, both with different ways to create windows, openings through walls, different ways to create skylights and pitched roofs, different ways for us to carve out edges and middles of space for porches. And there's sort of a pull at one end of a spectrum of the existing vernacular, which is this kind of tight envelope, small openings. They're not really taking advantage of the landscape from within. And the maximum version on the right, which is this kind of glass volume, taking in the maximum amount of the landscape. So we started studying the Great Hall, and we were starting to come up with a language of pretty significant exterior porches, covered zones between buildings, a breakdown of some of the massing so that these buildings wouldn't be too big within the landscape, but that everything would be focused on a view of Chain Lake, which is the largest lake in the center. So these large lounge spaces, big dining spaces for events and gatherings. And then a study on how we would start to execute that with raw wood, these porches that extend around the entire house, this kind of sectional change so that we could get more daylight in from above, but also give importance and kind of delineation between one space and the next. And so the project that we're actually starting with is called The Lodge. It was initially kind of the pub, and it was meant to be the place that you would hike through the woods, and after a 7-hour session of snowshoeing or something, you would end up at the pub and you would have a nice drink and relax. And so we situated this building right on the bluff, also overlooking Chain Lake with southern exposure. The plan in this diagram is slightly different from this one. But the idea is that you have a very solid facade facing the woods. And so you'd enter at the north, come into the building, into this lounge space. Your kind of living and kitchen and dining happens here. There's an open screen porch in between. The pub, which we'll see in a second, is here, taking the best advantage of both the western light and the southern exposure to the lake, and then a little bit of lodging space there. So we set this thing again with Reed Hildebrand's help as far into the woods and toward the edge of this bluff as we could to take most advantage of that southern exposure and access to Chain Lake. So some studies of the interior development, trying to use, again, we're translating that language of the original Adirondacks architecture into something that's obviously more refined, but still keeping elements of exposed structure that's real and actual wood. We're not cladding members, kind of rough-hewn interior wood surfaces. This kind of, when we use it, a significant amount of rough stone and these accents of metal. It's an image of the kitchen. And now we're walking through beyond the screen porch to the left into the pub. And trying to create within this space, this really will be the cozy space in the house. So big fire on the right, and then a bar space that really takes advantage of that entire sweeping view of Chain Lake, looking toward the south and really taking that in. And that's a study of the exterior. Again, we're sort of halfway through design, so this one's still on the boards. But making a form that is as quiet as it can be architecturally in this amazing landscape is really the key. And being able to focus on the materiality of the building as something that you could imagine coming from this place. The verticality of the wood boards moving along with the intense verticality of this amazing pine forest, but keeping the pavilion itself super simple within this complicated landscape. And I managed to be very quick about that so that we could get to the questions and the answers. Thank you guys so much. You got to get a mic.
All right, we already have a question, so we'll go.
Jasmine's all over it.
I was wondering if you were partially inspired by Mies van Dro's Farnsworth House.
For sure.
Yeah,
'cause how could you not be?
I was like, it looks like that, especially with it being raised above the ground.
Absolutely. I mean, there's probably not a project that we've ever done that we're not is somehow inspired by Mies, either that project. I mean, you could also see the Chicago Towers in that project. There's a lot of stuff that shows up. But yeah, I mean, that elemental form and kind of simplicity in pieces is definitely something we're kind of always going for.
Any, please raise your hand.
Hello.
Hello.
Two questions. Well, one is, what does like the CA process look like for you? Taking a super clean, simple design and like making sure that it gets executed like really, really, really well.
Super hard. But it's normal. Like, you know, the process that we go through on any building, there's going to be 5 or 6 of us that work on it in the office. There's going to be all these consultants. There's going to be all these people who fabricate and build. The kind of lines of communication have to be really kind of well used. And I'm not sure that our work is harder to execute than anybody else's, but we have to be kind of in the trenches with everyone doing that work. When we took our tour the other day, we had the GC there with us, who's someone we have great relationships with. And the conversation we were having is that, like, if you know these people and if they care about what your goals are and if you care about what their goals are, you can execute. But you can't do it by sort of throwing drawings over the transom and hoping it works out. Like, you have to be on site a bunch. You have to really kind of understand what our limitations are as designers and drawers are, and what maybe the limitations of the system on site might be. So it's very kind of relationship based for us. We've got to make that happen. It's not just make good drawings and have tight specs and pray for the best. You really got to work on it, particularly on some of the projects that are, you know, out in the woods, where it's, you know, a builder that's maybe never done contemporary work before, or that we certainly don't know them because we didn't ever do a house in that particular zone before. We've got to be really good at kind of setting up an initial relationship that's super trustworthy and that is going to be kind of in deep communication the whole time. And we have to be really good at drawing stuff and doing all that. But, you know, the hard part is the relationship part, actually. The drawing is actually fairly simple.
And the second one was, like, for a building that's supposed to connect with nature, why a courtyard form? Why an enclosed?
Mostly because you're in a vast landscape in that particular case. And so we were interested in kind of capturing, almost in the Japanese way, kind of capturing a piece of that landscape as the entry experience, and then moving into the architecture and kind of revealing the natural landscape again to you. Obviously, you don't have to do that, but we're sort of interested in this Japanese model, coming from some of our clients' interest as well, in how you separate yourself from the landscape by stepping up first, and then gathering a minute of that landscape in this courtyard space, and then moving into the architecture so that there's a bit more of a path from the front door to the final experience. Stretching that out a little bit was really important in that project.
Thanks.
Can you tell us a little bit about your rationale for flat roofs in forests?
The rationale for the flat roof in the forest was the connection, or the question. We started with not flat roofs, is the first answer. Our client was very interested in a quieter type of architecture than something that was going to be a little too referential to the cabin style or that particular form making. And technically, there's not actually a reason why we have to have a pitched roof versus a flat roof. We know that there are a lot of other flat roofs in that environment that hold up fine. And because we know we're building something new, we know that we're going to be able to kind of control those details and those materials. We will be lucky to work with a very good contractor who we're comfortable will be conscientious about that install. But yeah, it was kind of, it was driven by a goal of making the buildings really small within a big landscape. And so as soon as you kind of add on that level, everything has to get taller, and particularly if you want everything to slide right off, then the building has to get really tall. And so there was kind of a form-based reason for sticking with a flat roof in that environment, but we don't find it that challenging on the technical side, so we're comfortable with it.
Adam over here on the side. I really appreciate the sharing of the projects tonight. I think it goes without question that the work is beautiful and articulate and well considered. I have a question that we struggle with in our own practice, which is that of working mostly in privatized space. And so you have the contrast of projects like the last one you shared, where the client group is most significantly and mostly the only group affected by the project itself. But then you also have projects like the Quirk that have not only a privatized function in a downtown setting, but also have a role to play in the built environment, in their streetscape, in the way that people not staying at the hotel could use. So I wondered if you could speak to how your firm goes about considering those, valuing those, creating space for interactions that are outside of what the client brought to you in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that, the interesting thing about the Adirondacks camp, in a little bit of contrast to most single-family houses, is that it actually will be packed with people. There will be a lot of different people who get to show up there and use that property over its life. Our project in Montauk was sort of similar. It was a private project, but they have all sorts of events at that space that are also open to the public. So on the one hand, that project is a better example than usual of the residential project sort of giving more access to more people. I'm not sure that one or the other is better. I mean, I think we really love, and we talked about this with the Durham projects, we do love buildings and projects that will have a significant impact on an urban environment and have more to do with more people's lives. But every project is a design opportunity, and we find that getting good at some of these other projects, getting in the reps just like you guys do on a small house, makes us a better architect in all of these other projects that we do. There's a conversation happening within the office at all times about the kinds of architecture that we're interested in and how can we apply it to multiple scales and multiple typologies and different kind of public atmospheres. And so for us, that's a big conversation, and we're lucky enough to be doing a bunch of different kinds of work that we're able to kind of apply different ways to think about the built environment, whether it's public or private. You guys are lucky because you're doing a bunch more public stuff, and that's where it really gets juicy. And the kind of publicly funded things like the NCMA, which is really, the best version of this, where there's state funds, there's a state collection, there's a lot of energy. I would love to be doing museum work on a regular basis because you really have this exposure to a bunch of different people, and you're doing something that's specifically cultural. A multifamily building is still meant to, get people in it and rent the properties or sell them if it's a condo or whatever it is. But these public architecture projects really are, kind of the most interesting to have the most impact. when we do a multifamily building or a building like Quirk, we're usually trying to bring in the cultural layer, anchor the building in the place as much as possible, create more public space out of an otherwise private environment. We do that as much as we can because we really do care about that. But the nature of the business is that we do a lot of work for private people too.
Good evening and happy Monday to everyone. It's another amazing day in paradise. This is Mama Kai. That's my superhero name. I am, and please excuse me, I am not an architect. I'm not even in the design field technically. I am working on building homesteads for the homeless. But I've been really curious, especially seeing recognizing some of the project that you're working on here in Raleigh, and also not familiar with, but seeing the pictures from your projects in Durham. And I'm really curious, please excuse me if this is an ignorant question, but why is so much wood being used on so many of these projects? That, it seems terrifying to me, as opposed to steel framing for commercial projects, which I thought wood was mostly residential and steel was mostly commercial. So why wood? Please excuse me for those of you that are like, want to smack me on my hand, but this is, I really am struggling with this decision. And also, how does that lead, this is not a play on words, how does that, are these buildings designed to be LEED certified and environmentally, forward in their, in not just the architecture, but in also when people live there?
Right.
Thank you.
This is a safe space for market-driven questions about architecture, so you're all good. The truth is that, particularly when we're doing multifamily work that's developer-driven, a lot of it comes down to cost, and they're going to do the thing that, and it's not necessarily the cost of that item, it's the cost of that item here in Raleigh, Durham. It's a different story in New York City for a variety of reasons. It'll be a different story in Boston. It'll be a different story depending on where you live. Here, even getting brick work done as a layup system and not a panelized system is affordable because masons are inexpensive. Doing woodwork here instead of steel, that wood is affordable. It is still a sustainable project. I mentioned at the front that we really care about kind of where our buildings are coming from. And so we will generally be driven to market decisions because it's not us paying for the building. But we do try to advocate as much as possible for using the right materials when we can. Wood is not that bad. It's regrowable. You can get a lot of it. And a lot of people know how to put it together. So your knock-on costs of installation and everything else kind of also stay low. Mm-hmm.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for the talk. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
I have a question. This comes from some of the work that I do, and it's something that's interesting to me, and I want to see if you have experience with it. So I noticed in a lot of your projects, you create what I would say a curated experience within the space, where you have this idea of how the space will be used and how the user will be influenced, affected by the space, the volume, the light, the color. I've found that even with light suggestions, there have been some very interesting, unexpected outcomes in how people use space that seems somewhat counterintuitive to me at times. I want to know if you've experienced anything interesting that stands out and how you've adapted and what you've learned from it.
Yes. We don't own these buildings, right? So as soon as we do them, they move out into the world, and we'll be lucky enough to come back and photograph them. I think we do believe in kind of flexibility of thought. There's one thing which is kind of designing and scene setting and being able to present to all you wonderful people something that is coherent. But the life of the building is completely not that, and it's messy, and it takes, it will last a lot longer than our buildings or our drawings and our presentations do. you know, the North Carolina Museum has very recently been pretty well rejiggered in some significant ways that we would not have expected, for instance. It's bigger than a house or anything like that, but it's probably our most significant experience with what you're talking about. We don't own it. We can have, you know, some input. If people trusted us enough to design it and help them build it, then sometimes they'll listen to us on the back end for how to use it. But these buildings are people's, you know, own homes or their own offices, and so the more that we can kind of plan for flexibility and be mentally flexible, that the thing is going to go in 10 different directions. You just hope it doesn't get torn down. So yeah, you just have to deal with it. You know, I don't think there's any. I would say we probably also try not to be super specific about how a space might be used if we're not in the residential environment. Obviously, a kitchen's going to be a kitchen probably the whole time. But if it's an office, if it's a gallery space, if it's even in the multifamily environment, you try to be as flexible as possible. And you can't predict the entire future, but you try to foresee some version of the future that will say, yeah, that family is going to be able to do this thing down the road, or that office is going to be able to expand in these ways. The best environment is when someone comes back to us to do that reworking and to do that reimagining. Arts and Letters is doing that with us right now on their headquarters in Richmond. And they've invited us to help them design other spaces across the country for the reason that they sort of understand that we are flexible in the way we want to think about it, and we're not kind of locked in to one way to do it. So yeah, you have to be flexible and kind of let the thing happen over time. There's no way to fix it in place.
Cool. Any other questions? All right, thank you so much, Adam, for sharing.
Thanks, y'all.